Our keynote speaker for this morning is a good friend of mine, and certainly his expertise in many areas is evident. I'm going to read his biography here for Tom Belt. Mr. Belt is the Western Carolina University Cherokee Language Program Coordinator. He is working to create a state-of-the-art Cherokee language program at the university level. Mr. Belt teaches the first 4 semesters of Cherokee language, and he co-teaches courses on Cherokee grammar and Cherokee language literature. Mr. Belt, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, is a fluent Cherokee speaker and works closely with the speakers from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians to produce culturally based Cherokee language learning material. Before joining the Cherokee language program, Mr. Belt worked as a counselor's aide in the local treatment center for Native youth with chemical dependencies. He attended the universities of Oklahoma and Colorado and taught the Cherokee language at the Cherokee Elementary School in Cherokee, North Carolina. Mr. Belt has also served as a consultant to various cultural archives and to various indigenous language programs in public schools and on the post-secondary level. At this time, you'd join me in welcoming Tom Belt to the stage.
Okay. Thank you, former Vice Chief Blythe, and Principal Chief Hicks, if he's still around. I also want to thank him, and I want to also thank the Intertribal Timber Council, and in particular Tommy Cave, my good friend, for asking me to participate and to also address this august body this morning. And I want to take this time then to, and like everyone, as is one of the traditions of our people, to initially welcome everyone to these mountains. Welcome here this morning and this week to these very, very ancient mountains. The Kituwa people have resided in these mountains by archaeological accounts, by the current archaeological accounts, for an estimated 13,000 years. The shard remains that have been carbon dated go back to our being here for 13,000 years. And in that long period of residing here, our relationship with these mountains and these lands has become internal as well as eternal. Our connection to these mountains existed in our society as an affirmation of the concept of kinship, no different than you would considering your own brothers and sisters, your own mothers and fathers. We related and were connected to this land in that same manner. inseparable from our existence as water and air that we breathe, this land. Indivisible from ourselves as family, kinship, and clan. Our knowledge and understanding of these mountains derived from millennia's old research and observation and data compilation afforded us a deep and resolute understanding of the environmental biology of these mountains. It is said among stories handed down that this being the most diverse, the Southern Appalachians being the most diverse biological area on the North American continent, with so many plants and so much wildlife, as we call it. It's said that our people, we passed down a story that said there was a time in which we had a name for every plant that grows in these mountains. And today, the national park, about once every month or once every year or twice, 3 times every year, come up with they find a new kind of plant here that they didn't know existed here before. That kind of knowledge, it is said, we knew before the arrival of Europeans here. And not only did we know the names of every plant, but we knew in our relationship established with these plants, we knew what to use as nourishment and what to be used as medicine. And not just as nourishment for ourselves or medicine for ourselves, but how they interacted with other plants and other species of plants and other kinds of life in these forests, and how they provided them with nourishment and how they provided them with medicine. This story has been handed down for thousands of years, and it has only changed in our outlook and in our vocabularies and in the way in which we relate to the land in the past 200 or 300 years. Our knowledge and understanding of these mountains derives over millennia of research, comprise that knowledge of that knowledge of that biological science. It provided us with an absolute scientific understanding of not just what sufficed our needs, but a greater understanding of how we could be a facilitator for the sustainability of a place that provided us with life. We existed not by application of a Bill of Rights, but we existed here by the application of a bill of responsibility to the very land that we lived on, to each other, and to that purpose that we understood could be the reason why we're here. It was taught in our ceremonies that we must that we're to promulgate. It was taught that our ceremonies, promulgate a systematic reminder of these responsibilities, to remember what has been given us and what we are to keep. I believe that in our tribal societies, yours and mine, that we share these same traditions. This is actually what our culture is. The applied realization over thousands of years of existence on this continent to not understand what is available for us to use, but how we fit into the scope and the magnitude of what life on this continent, on this planet, means. And our understanding of that is what is referred to by Western European academia as American Indian culture, sometimes even lowered to mythology, and using the most important word in our language and applying that word sacred beliefs almost as if it's secondary to actual scientific belief. Not realizing that the knowledge of these mechanisms, the knowledge of how to live like this, and the way in which we interpret these things, and the way in which we practice them and memorize them in our ceremonies, and how we use these ceremonies to remind ourselves of these laws, these biological laws, is in fact true science. I believe that retaining and protecting these gifts of the Creator, that in protecting these gifts of the Creator, we retain agency of not just our purpose, but we retain agency of our own lives. Something that has been usurped and taken away from us. Something that has been given up over the past 200 to 300 years. Slowly but surely, we have become disconnected with our own environment, and a lot of our people don't even know what exists in our backyards, and our children can't tell you what plants grow 10 feet out of their front door. From a people who knew every plant and how to use them, the purpose of every plant here, to not even knowing what's outside our own doorstep. Among the Mohawk people, it's said that plants are the only living things on the face of the earth that will come all the way to your doorstep to help you if you allow it. I believe this to be a true axiom, and I believe this to result from the same concepts that we had among our own people for thousands of years. And I am absolutely positive it is the same concepts that existed in your own tribal societies. This is what's been handed down to us. This is what we have been given, is a memory of how things were at one time. We all know and can recount example after example of the tragedies that befell all of our peoples in that time period. And we can recite them almost by rote. Every date, every place, every event, and to some degree, all the people who were involved in it. But this cannot be. We cannot make this into this prescribed method by how we recognize ourselves. In Oklahoma, the Cherokee Nation and other tribes are involved in remembering the removal and how we got there in 1838 and 1839 in those years. And we reference it like we've been taught to reference it as the Trail of Tears, even though we never referred to that event as a Trail of Tears. That was published in a newspaper in Boston, I think, in the early 1890s or the early 1900s, and was interpreted as that kind of an event. And that name has stuck since then, to the point to where we use it on our logos, to where we talk about it, to where we've even made theatrical dramas about that event. So much so that we have almost become the Trail of Tears people. We cannot allow ourselves to be lulled into believing that we are products of that kind of tragedy. And we must end the victimizing of our own cultures. And how we do that is to take on a new concept of how we look at of what our responsibilities are. And we remember that time. Instead, we remember that time when things were correct here, when the natural balance and the bounties of the land that we live in was kept almost at a perfect, harmonious balance. A time in which there was ample health, both mental and physical, in our tribes and in the lives of our kinfolk, these things that live in the mountains and the very land itself. That must become what we remember, and that must be what will drive our efforts to protect and to keep and to promulgate that kind of balance in and around our tribal areas and our homelands. It is extremely important that we take on that kind of proactive, if you will, revitalization and gaining of our place on this continent. I don't really care about the kind of having to fit in the kind of society, the matrix society that exists in this country. I prefer to look at it from the standpoint that my elders and people before that of all of our tribes handed down to us in our understanding of the world we live in. I prefer to use that as the understanding of what I am, because as I've stated, we are a part of that. We are kin to it. We're not akin to the tragedy. We're not akin to the suffering that our people went through. And the best way to utilize this concept is to promulgate a healthy society around us, for our children, for our people, and for the very land itself. We must become responsible to it, because it has been responsible for us for so very long. Try not breathing air for a while. Trees provide us with that. Try not drinking water for a while. The forest in this land provides that. Try not taking medicine for a while, because the forests provide that. It is my understanding that virtually almost 75 or more or 80% of all pharmaceuticals created in the medical world are still plant derivative. And in fact, when the outbreak of COVID happened, one of the first things the CDC in Atlanta did was to go over was to try and see if there might be a plant somewhere that's being used that could help with that vaccine. We are still hunter-gatherers, no matter who we are. And we can't hunt and gather on the main streets of our town. We can only do that in the real world. Because what we're hunting for and what we're hunting for now is the solutions and the way in which we can promulgate health on our own lands. And we're gathering information to promote that. So basically, yes, we are still hunter-gatherers, but on a different venue, but for the same purpose, to exist harmoniously and healthy in our worlds. It is imperative that we embrace and revitalize our connections to our land in this manner. We are responsible to those who came before us and to those yet to come. And we must apply this way of looking at it. The codes, the codes and clear interpretations of how we look at that and how we judge that and how we evaluate those kinds of things are encoded in each of our languages. The way in which life exists on the Great Plains of this continent, in the north, in the Great Lakes, in the far west and the northwest coast, and in the deserts of our land, the codes to understanding how we do that and how we can facilitate that stewardship exists in our languages. And we must promote the revitalization and the re-grasping of the way in which we talk and to understand it. We must do this also for our children so that they will understand what we're talking about. So that they will understand, for example, in our language, the word for root, una stedla, helps to conjugate in the stem for the word astelta. Una stedla and astelta. Una stedla means roots of any plant, of any tree, anything that is a root. And the word astelta means to help. We understood roots to not just be a foundational, structural, archaeological kind of situation a tree uses to stand up. It also communicates and helps other plants around it of its own kind and other plants that exist there. Those roots are helpers. We understood this 1,000 years ago, and I'm glad that current biology is beginning to catch up with that. This is the importance of our language. This is the application we can use to assist us in understanding better what I'm talking about when I reference our responsibility to the environment and to our lands. We are responsible, as I said, to those who came before us and those yet to come. And I commend each and every one of you for your work and your efforts to make that sustainability in that kind of way and in that perspective. It is a change, I realize, in the current paradigms of how we look at where we live and what we're responsible for. And I commend you for your work to change those paradigms back to real science and real logic and real rationale about how the world works, because we've been doing this for thousands of years. That we must remember and that we must apply. If we do not promulgate this way of thinking, if we do not continue to take care of our lands, if we do not continue to take care of our forests and protect those things, because of all those things I've just said, then our declarations of who we are then become meaningless. And we are not that anymore. Only with a resolute commitment to remembering who and where we came from will we foster the strengthening of these ancient ties with our land, our people, with each other, and with ourselves. It is important that you are here. It is important the work that you are doing. It promulgates who we are, because as I've tried to state, we have been here for a very long time. And these lessons are not to be forgotten that are handed down. The way in which we look at the world, the way in which we've been taught to consider who we are and how we identify ourselves as promulgators of that kind of health and that kind of resource for the land, not just for ourselves, but for the very land that gave us birth, for the very land that our people have returned to, for those things that we should know 10 feet outside our own front doors. For these things, then we must never forget how important this way of looking at it, this paradigm shift from the current way we look at things because of what we have been conditioned and colonialized to think is our existence. We need to be defined by our own standards, and this is the way that we achieve that agency, is by declaring our commitment and our work and re-strengthening our ties with the very land we live on. This is who we are. This is who we've always been. It is important to remember that, and it is important to use that as the guiding principles and philosophies to promulgate that kind of work, to induce that kind of successful outcome for the future. When we won't have to search for these things, when these things will be taught in our own schools, when these things will begin to be retaught by our own people, our own grandmothers, by you, who will probably become grandmothers and grandfathers and great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers in due time. This is what you carry forward from a time in the past to now. We cannot bring back those who have left us. We cannot bring back those who were here 1,000 years ago or 13,000 years ago. But we can remember their words and their teaching and apply to this time just as effectively and as efficiently as when they were spoken by those people thousands of years ago. Because it is not a philosophy. It is not the laws that we made up about how we should identify ourselves. All of these things that we know, our ceremonies, our beliefs in what these things are based in true and objective science. They tell us that Indians, Native Americans, believe that water is sacred, as if it's some kind of an afterthought, like that's what they choose to believe. It's a cultural trait handed down that they believe water is sacred. Right at this moment, somewhere in the outer reaches of the Earth, somewhere in this galaxy, there are probes being sent out to determine what kind of life may exist there. And the first thing that they look for when they are exploring an asteroid or another planet or a moon someplace else, you all know that the first thing they look for are signs of water, because water indicates that there could, if water had been present or exists there, it indicates that life could exist there. So that means NASA thinks water is sacred too. We are not that far removed from that actual thought because it is based on actual hard science. That is who we are. That is our responsibility. That is what we must do, is to keep this relationship, to strengthen this relationship with our own lands, and to bring back that kind of knowledge. It is important that we stop the concept of being victims year after year after year. It has created ill health. It has created ill mental health among our tribes. And the way in which we heal that, the way in which we see to fixing that, the way in which we resolve the matter of coming back to who we were as healthy people resides in the way in which we are going to act on our own land and how we're going to take back that responsibility of being responsible for our own lands and our own water and our own air. We have an absolute ancient tie with trees, with the things that grow in these forests. Without them, you and I would not be here today. And all of this talk that I'm speaking would be moot because we wouldn't be here. We'd be someplace working in a bank or working for Google or something. But yet we are here, not just to remember what we're doing and be a part of what everybody else is doing in other tribes, but we're here to remember who we are. The importance of our work promulgates that positive, that correct way in which we view ourselves, our people, our history, and our future. That is what is at stake. That is what is important about the work that you are doing. As I said, we have been in these mountains by archaeological reckoning for 13,000 years. I also said we would say that it was longer, but we're not here for a anthropological lecture. But I'm sure that you, in your own tribal societies, have realized that those stories have been told too. That we've been here much longer than anybody realizes at this point, and our connection with these things is old. We have been in these mountains for that long. We are a part of it in that manner. We don't just share breathing space. We're a part of the breathing space in the life of these mountains. We are not from here. We are of here, just as you are of your own tribal lands and the places you come from. The knowledge that your tribes had about those areas is extremely important and valuable to the science and to the sustainability of this continent. This place we call our home. It's called the United States. It's called America. It's called North America. In our language, we call this place Amayehling, which translates to in the middle of the water. That's what we call America, Amayehling, the middle of the water. So apparently we knew where this place was on a global reckoning thousands of years before anybody else did. This knowledge goes intrinsic with every indigenous group on this continent. That's the science we need. That's the science we have, and that's the science we need to apply. We cannot survive, we will not survive as a people without that kind of driving understanding of who and why we're here. Because just holding a tribal membership card in your wallet or your purse is not enough to really say who you are. If that's all it is. If that's all it is an indicator or an admittance card to whatever relative gifts and things that you can receive by being a member of that, much like being a member of a club, then it's not very valuable. And it's self-centered and it's egotistical if that's all it is. Without the understanding that card that you have in your back pocket, that card you have in your wallet or your purse that says you are a member of a tribe in this country, came at an extremely heavy cost. There are some 14,000 of our people buried in unmarked graves between here and Oklahoma, mostly children and mostly elders. They were moved in the hardest time, the hardest and most coldest time of the year in the winter, and the coldest year that had been documented up until that point. And the ones that didn't survive were the children, and the ones that didn't survive were the elders. That membership card, that enrollment card in my pocket or in my wallet came at a very heavy cost. And we must not forget then our responsibility to keeping alive the idea of surviving and surviving in a way that is complicit with all the concepts that in the matrix world are considered science. It is our responsibility. It is our duty. And your jobs are extremely, extremely important to facilitate that for our people, because we have to stop being victims, and we have to take agency for who we are now. We owe it. If we do not do this, then the millennia-old voices that exist in these mountains right outside this building, across the road, and in these mountains, in these valleys, along these waterways, those millennia-old voices that we cannot hear anymore will become unfelt now. We cannot hear them. But each and every Kituwa person, and that is our name for ourselves, Kituwa, when asked about what it means to live in these mountains, is very hard to explain because there's many facets to it. But when we say, because it just feels like home, it just feels like where I'm supposed to be. That is a result of thousands of years of voices of our people in these mountains, in these valleys, singing, speaking, laughing, and crying. And we cannot leave that behind, and you cannot either on your own lands. If we do not continue on with these efforts, if you do not work towards these things, if we as tribal people do not work for those things, then these voices will become unfelt and we will not be connected with it anymore. And the voices yet to come that don't understand these concepts, that can't use the words to describe even the roots of a plant and how it works, will become different, and we will not be able to understand it. And maybe the world won't be able to understand it. We have evidence that the language we use promulgates a misunderstanding of that science anyway. When we use the word natural resources, it underlines a concept of saying that it's a resource for us. Not for any purpose except for us. Not for any reason except to put money back into our pockets. The language does that. It deanimates, it dehumanizes, and objectifies something that is alive and real that we have understood to be that way for thousands of years. This is the gift of the Creator, our lands. And if we are to be who we say we are, then we must keep these objectives and we must retain our agency to be who we are. And one of the ways in which we do that is to protect our lands. And I want to thank you this morning for allowing me to speak. In our language, we would say, Nagadawu, everyone. Nagadawu, wado, ski. Thank you. And then we would say, Skawunu, stesti. Let it be that way. Thank you.